Hi, good morning. Today is day 21, looking at the shapes and segments of the ocean industry. And I was lucky enough to have Yngvil join us this morning. And I hope I said her name right, because I don't think I've ever said it out loud before. And yeah, she's going to talk a little bit about herself and what she does to introduce her to those who might not know her yet.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. It's a pleasure being here. And you did pronounce my name nearly perfect. And that's a bit of a rare thing in the global industry, having a very Norwegian special name. So you wanted to hear just a bit of my background? Yeah. So I've been in the shipping industry for more than 30 years. So a long history. It started with I'm an engineer as a background and a maritime engineer. And then I spent 10 years in DNV, the Classification Society, in different positions before I moved on to a Norwegian ship owner called Hög. I run their ship management business for a few years, also did operation before I moved to BW Group, where I'm at today. I've had different positions here, but for the last better part of the 6-7 years, I've been the CEO of BW LNG. So very much on the shipping side of the oceans industry.
You're on the shipping side, but you're also in a way adjacent to the energy sector because LNG is very related.
Yes.
Where do you see any other overlaps between what you do and the other parts of the industry that you interact with?
Yeah, no, energy is of course the obvious one. I mean, in BW Group, we have this mission statement saying that we are delivering energy for the world today, and then we are finding solutions for tomorrow. And I've been lucky enough to be working for a group that is quite wide-ranging and has actually developed quite a lot also into other parts of the industry. So, for instance, I'm on the board of BW Ideol, who develops floating offshore wind projects and also have a technology for the floater. So we have this universe in BW Group that goes beyond the traditional shipping as well. So that's true. And I'm also I really like this expression of the ocean space, which we have quite a lot in Norway. It's not widely used, but it's a very kind of it's a world in itself, these oceans, and it entails so much. If I look at kind of my own work and where we interface to other industries and other segments, energy, yes, power, very much. Power, of course, offshore power, but also onshore power. Few of the vessels we have in BW LNG are floating off terminals, delivering gas to gas power plants ashore. So obviously power. I think also it's one thing which I noticed when I looked at some of your slides is that a very important stakeholder, but also where we have an interface in ocean spaces, is the trading industry. And they are actually a big driver on how we do things in maybe specifically shipping, but I think in general in the oceans industry. So that's an important force to keep in mind when you're mapping out everything we are doing and what is driving it.
Was it this one that you were talking about, or the?
Yeah, I looked at several other sides, and I didn't really see the trader.
They've evolved over time.
Yeah, sure. No, I see that. And of course, you have the charters, and the traders are the charters, but it's more than the charters because they are traders are the one in a way moving not only energy and oil and gas in the world, but also grains and metals and coal and everything. And how goods are being traded in the world is a big driver for how the shipping industry is behaving.
I think that's completely true. And I think that it's also true that the interfaces between both the shore side modality of transport and the ship side modality of transport not only affect each other, but have a great potential for greater efficiency than they do through the use of digital tools and things that haven't yet been applied across that industry barrier, because you have well, that's that industry and this is that industry,
True. I mean,
instead
the
of
silo thinking is actually quite a bit of bottleneck here, but
yeah.
it's more than that, because it's not really the traders will optimize on where they can sell kind of the goods, kind of where they can buy the goods at the lower price and sell it at the highest. It's a very
Yeah.
commercial business.
Mhm.
And the transportation, whether sea or shore or air or rail or whatever it is, becomes minor in the bigger scheme of things of deciding how the goods are going to move. And it means that the goods are not moving efficiently,
Mhm.
which is actually not very sustainable.
No. How do you think that that could change? Or how many players do you think would have to collaborate
I mean,
to do that?
this
And
is
you
in
don't
a
have to
way,
go
it's very strong commercial forces, of course, and so if you're gonna try to regulate that, I think it's quite hard, but maybe you need to. But how how to do it? And you need to really, it needs to be global, because it's very global. So it needs to be kind of a UN regulating it, and then you have to overcome some, I mean, really strong commercial forces. So it feels like a daunting task, but and you have also, so one thing is the traders' commercial interest, but I think we have to dare to talk a bit about the elephant in the room for the shipping industry.
Mhm.
If trading was efficient, we would need much less ships in the world.
Yeah. Well, that's like the anchorage problem. Depending on which segment of shipping you're in, you can spend, a month or two at anchor outside, and then there's the on-time arrival or the virtual arrival question that's coming up now. And if those ships are not being utilized for transport and they're sitting around for 30% of their usage time, then maybe there needs to be 30% less of those types of vessels.
That's kind of one thing, but I think more important is, we are getting orders to go to Houston, and then in the middle of the Atlantic we are turned around, and then we go to
Mhm.
totally kind of, then we go to Shanghai instead, and all this kind of type of inefficiencies is even stronger than just the waiting time. So it's all fine and good that we have kind of digital tools to help us to arrive at the port at the right time, but as
Yeah,
long as the how the
the port's changing.
exactly. So it's quite complex and quite out of our control.
Mhm. I
And
think
it
that
links
kind of
also, to this debate about alternative fuels as well. If you look at if you really lift yourself up and you look at the shipping industry, of course we need to do our bit, and no one should be in doubt about that. But uh, it is also the most environmental friendly way of transporting goods.
yeah. I had that conversation with Matt Duke, I think it was 2 days ago. We talked quite a lot about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. And but then also then we have now lots of talk about alternatives and zero carbon fuels, which is very short in supply. It's very little
yes,
available green ammonia or green
there's no
hydrogen or anything, or
infrastructure to
biofuels or
make
anything. And then if
mhm,
you look at kind of the map of all the people or all the kind of industries that needs these alternative green fuels, where do
mhm,
you get most value for money?
mhm,
And it's probably not shipping. I mean, you should probably kind of attack cement and steel and industry first before you start kind of transporting it, and then burning it in an engine where you're kind of losing 70-80% of the energy. So
mhm.
you have that debate at the same time as it's very hard to actually have that debate, because you're very easily seen as, oh, it's just this old conservative dirty industry that don't want to do their bit,
Yeah,
which I
yeah.
don't think is fair actually at all, because I think we have already done quite a lot. If you look at how we have reduced our emissions over the last few years, and we are a very hard to abate industry, and I think people haven't really realized how difficult it is.
Yeah, and the volumes of alternative fuels you might be talking about can be really quite substantial, which
Eh,
is why, it's
Huge.
not worth talking about hydrogen and ammonia in some senses
No,
because it's
it's
just
huge,
not possible to.
and before we have right now, I mean, it's really good to see that build out the renewables is is accelerating. However, we are far from having enough renewable
Yes.
energy just kind of for direct use, not to
Hmm.
say to then produce green fuels. And
Yeah.
of course, you might have some pockets here and there, but that's very different from having it accessible in all the ports that we need it to. And then, of
Yeah.
course, it's also the question of how, I mean, it's availability, but this is also the safety issue, because ammonia is super toxic and hydrogen is very explosive.
It's very worrying to
So
me.
you have several bottlenecks here that we need to solve, and which we are working hard on. Right now,
Yeah.
for instance, BW Group, we are one of the funding part of the Global Decarbonization Center in Singapore, and one of the pilots we're running now is how to safely bunker ammonia. So
Yeah.
lots of work going on. But if we were to shift to, for instance, ammonia today, I mean, ammonia is available, but it's
Yeah.
much more dirty than what we are burning today.
Yeah.
So,
It's true. Because it's not produced in
no,
a
it's
green way.
brown
It's not
ammonia.
possible to do that with enough green energy
Yeah.
sources to make, uh, green ammonia.
Sorry,
And
maybe
then
I
it, yeah.
derailed your discussion now.
No, it's okay. This project is all about derailments, because then it kind of explores the areas that I don't have knowledge in. Because, like, for me in the maritime industry, I spent 13 years as a seafarer, and then I've been in technology development for the last almost 5 years. So I spent a lot of time at sea, and I did, 7 years on FSRUs. So I'm very familiar with going across the ocean and back, and also being the supplier for the power plants. Been there, done
Yeah,
that.
you've seen it.
But, there's whole parts of the commercial side that I didn't see and that I'm not as familiar with as I would like to
Mm,
be. And when I'm looking at kind of the amazing amount of challenge and opportunity we have in the industry to make this transition and make this shift, and how do we design that transition to happen? Because if the commercial forces are so great that it's preventing it to happen, well, how do we make a different market force? How do we make, a collaborative market force? Would it take a large cargo owner to say, no, we're shifting,
mm,
and to drive that change commercially? It's really hard in the bulk commodity market because your customer is changing every 5 minutes. But if your customer is stable, so if you're talking about, box transportation, or if you're talking about long-term energy contracts, then there's a possibility that if that cargo owner
mm,
sees that
mm.
drive, that they might be able to push a shift.
Yeah. And I do think that we see some of it starting to come. I mean, I'm also being quite involved in car carrier business back in my days, and now I'm in the board of Wallenius Wilhelmsen as well. And we do see kind of some of the car manufacturers that are facing real customer demands, or direct customer demands, are starting to be willing to look at this differently. But when you talk about the trader industry, and I'm not going to name anyone here because I don't think that's fair, but they don't, I mean, they don't have direct consumer contacts. And it's still a world where pricing and money means kind of are the one setting and make
It's often referred to as being an invisible industry
sure.
because the goods show up when they need to show up, and it goes from the mine to the factory, and from the factory then gets transported, and the consumers don't see it until it's in the store, and maybe it's been on a ship already 3 or 4 times. And that's true with
And
cars
we
also.
shouldn't estimate that, this availability of energy and material, and it kind of in a cost efficient way has been part of bringing people out of poverty, and actually have a good side to it as well. It's
But
just that on the
without it,
emission side, so you can you can make a good story out of how we are trading goods today, but it
but
has a back.
if you look at like the global wheat trade, for example, as a bulk
Yeah,
commodity, I did my first contract on a ship was in World Aid Grain. So as third officer, we carried grain to Africa and the Middle
yeah,
East. And without that, they don't have food
no,
in a
exactly.
lot of sense. It's the resources aren't evenly distributed, whether you're talking about resources that are mine, or you're talking about, the availability to grow safe food.
Yes.
And without that, we could have a big global collapse. And looking at like the war in Ukraine and the collapse of grain there has really raised prices
Yeah,
on grain in the emerging
sure.
world.
Sure.
And that's really concerning, but it's shipping that makes it
Yeah.
possible
And I
from
think
West.
this is one of the issues which uh, is making this so difficult, because politicians, they like quick answers, they have kind of short time, they're short in office, they need clear messages, and the debate becomes too black and white, too simplistic, and we are
Hmm.
losing out on then kind of the complexity. And of course, people want to simplify because then it looks easier to find solutions. But honestly, if we're going to find good solution, we actually have to realize the complexity and be willing to address that as well. And trying to kind of find solutions that is not then jeopardizing other parts, which is good.
Yeah. Like
And I
if
find
you,
these debates, especially around emissions, to be far too simplistic.
yeah, I mean, if you were to switch grain transportation to biofuel and you make the grain twice as expensive to transport, there are markets that desperately need that grain that can't pay the difference.
Exactly.
And that's something, that we need to work on as a society. How do we
Yeah. How do you
make
do?
this transition in a good way without crippling the emerging world, and help them, grow electronic infrastructure and grow better ways of living, and grow the availability of food and resources and good work. And if you want to reach all of the SDGs, we have a lot of work to
Well,
do,
we do,
and
and we
time is
should
getting
work on
shorter.
all of it. But sometimes maybe we should be clear on priorities and be
Yeah.
and allowing the time it needs to actually find solutions that kind of looks more holistic on the problem,
Mhm.
rather than focusing on Norway needs to reduce its emission to this, and then actually doing things that not necessarily help
Mhm.
the kind of change or the reduction of emissions for the world. It helps for Norway.
Yeah.
And it's also very
There's
easy to
trade-offs.
say in Norway that, let the consumer pay, but then shift your perspective to Syria or Pakistan, and
Mhm.
then you have some other challenges if price at the end
Definitely.
product goes up.
Well, looking at it, as a holistic system, because if you look at the SDGs as like a holistic system that we want to deliver on,
Mm.
and I don't think anyone will argue that any of them are necessarily bad things to want to have, but what do you think would be the kind of priority list of being able to maybe tackle some of those challenges?
For
Where
me,
to
it's
start?
rather obvious that climate change is the kind of our by far biggest challenge, and if we don't get that under control, and if you don't solve that issue, we'll have much bigger issues. I mean, just look at the flooding in Pakistan and what that is costing to clean up or rebuild. So I think that is by far what should be our kind of main priority. But
Mhm.
it's very hard, of course. I mean, of course, we need to work on human rights. Of course, we need to give everyone fair chance and gender equality and fair chance for education and all of these others. But for me, if I kind of put on the wall and have to choose, climate change is by far
Mhm.
the biggest one and most important.
If you had like a dream collaboration to work on that between people you know or have heard of or have seen, what do you think would be your kind of dream collaborative team to tackle some of those challenges?
Mhm. That's a very difficult question. Uh, but I think I'm coming back to how to the whole how we are transporting goods around the world.
Mhm.
Um, and then of course it's not like one trader and a ship owner, and it needs to be more kind of taking the global perspective in an effective global community that wants to do the best for the world. And I don't think we have that today. I mean, UN is not very effective these days.
Do you think that it has to be an industry or cross-industry collaboration? So do you think that it's like the role of, an Intertanko or a BIMCO or something like that? Or do you think that it's the role of the
No, because I
making
don't think,
the
I mean,
iron
Intertanko and BIMCO, I mean, they are industry organizations, and this goes much beyond the industry, and that's why I'm saying that. I mean, for me, it looks again. The only thing I can think of is a revitalized UN with a proper mandate
Mhm,
that is not political, which is not about politics, but which is about saving the world.
mhm,
But and then I think the difficulty here is that in doing that, you have to make some sacrifices.
mhm. Do you think that it's possible to make a multi-industry led one, like a BIMCO or like an Intertanko, but with a bunch of members within the industry just pushing for it to change? Because if you're talking about the commercial interests, or you're talking about those things, if you leave it to an outside regulator to deal with,
Yeah.
they may not see
Uh,
the complexity in the issue.
mm.
Because as you had talked about before, do you think that it's possible that
No, and I
the
think I mean, of course, you need to cascade it down, and then you come to the industry, and I think that is you kind of in the questions you sent me before this, you talked about you asked kind of how which is the stakeholders and how they
Mhm,
collaborate, but I think one of the and what's the bottlenecks for getting things done, and I think one of the bottlenecks we have in the shipping industry specifically is that we don't have one voice. And if you look at our industry, I mean, we have Intertanko, we have BIMCO, then we have ICS, we have a number of this, and then in the gas we
Sigto,
have
you have
Sigto, and and
SES.
even those are struggling to speak with one voice because we have so strong traditionally. I mean, it's been a lot driven by the ship owners, right? So.
Yeah.
And ship owners have traditionally not been good at speaking with one voice. And we have quite
Mhm,
different interests, and we come from very different cultures.
yeah.
And I think that's a real bottleneck.
Mhm.
And maybe
How could
you should
we
have Kathy on the kind of president of Intertaco
yeah.
to talk about
I've talked to her a few
if
times.
she wants
She's
to
great.
speak about it, how difficult it is actually to get our industry to speak with one voice.
Yeah, I think that it's she's in a really challenging position there. I'm she was a long time the like first managing director that was a woman that I'd ever seen in real life
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
met her
And the
several years
interesting
ago.
thing with her is, of course, she is a biologist by
Yeah,
education, so she has actually a very wide perspective to all of this.
because
So she has
yeah,
some
I was
interesting reflections, but it's of
yeah.
course highly political, the whole thing.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to spend time with her in India in November
Okay, yeah,
because she was on the panel I was
yeah,
running at the Maritime CEO conference. So I got to spend quite a lot of time with her, which was really nice because then we can really geek out on the
yeah.
industry and what we really need to do here. Um, yeah, let me look back at my questions and see if I missed things that I wanted to talk about. But I don't know, it's such a huge thing that I'm trying to put into context for myself and
Yeah.
share it with
I and
anyone
I pick up
who's
on a couple of things which
yeah,
I thought was interesting. I think you know to we have all these challenges and you know I can dream about this revitalized UN, but reality is that that's probably going to be far away, or if it's ever going to happen. So what can we do with what we have? And
yeah.
I'm actually personally really think that is important when you have big difficult stuff. Um,
Mhm,
And it's clear, I think it's two things which is kind of high on my agenda. One thing is we need really good people
mhm,
in this industry because what we are dealing with is so critical. I consider shipping as in the blood vessel of the world. So
mhm.
it should be so attractive for a
Yeah.
lot of people to be part of, and working in our industry you can really make a difference on sustainable developments because I
Yes.
mean as a private working in other lots of other industries, it's very limited what you can do, but actually if you're a superintendent sitting outside here in my office here, you can make a difference, several kind of thousands of tons of CO2 a year So we have this. Uh, People think that we are such a dirty industry, but are we have been so bad at branding ourselves. So how do we really make people aware of what a great industry we are, so we can attract even more talent and more
Mhm.
diverse talent? And when I say diverse, it's also the people coming in with different perspectives, coming from different industries, so we can learn.
Different backgrounds, not the favorite schools and the favorite
Exactly,
places.
exactly. And we need all that talent. So I think that's one thing which is important for me. And also in that, your questions around being more human centered, we are a, an industry where safety needs to be kind of first and foremost of everything we are doing.
Yeah, and I think that, safety in some ways has been systematized in a point that it's not necessarily effective, because they say, well, it was human error, they should have followed the process. This process is really
Yeah,
complicated. It has lots and lots of steps. And
yeah,
because people aren't perfect, they made a mistake somewhere along the line. And while it is a perfect process, maybe it's not perfect for imperfect humans.
no, exactly.
And
And
I
that's the
think that
point that I
design
think
has
for
so much.
safety process is important, but it's all about culture. It's that safety culture, and safety culture is all about people. And
Mhm,
creating good safety culture is all, I mean, that is actually centering all things that are good. That is
mhm,
creating an inclusive, diverse environment where everyone can thrive, and
yeah,
where you dare to talk about what's difficult, what we need to
mhm.
solve, where the process doesn't fit, where you have to kind
Well,
of
I think we
deviate
have even
on it. And
I
that's such an important, we have been, it's been so much focused on compliance in our industry, in the shipping
mhm,
industry, and it's wetting and it's TMSA, and we have to comply with
yeah,
this, that, and the other. And everything, every time we have something which is going wrong, is actually, I sometimes feel that it's more focused on that it was a non-compliance rather than, okay, what can we learn from this and how can we take this further? And
definitely.
we run the risk of people following process no matter what, just to be in compliance, even when it doesn't make
Yeah,
sense. And we need people
exactly.
who think, because no day is right, no situation is the same, and then we need smart people, we need talent people,
Mhm,
we need people who dares to think from themselves, dare to discuss, dare to speak up,
mhm,
and that's what safety culture is about.
yeah. But I mean, coming from my perspective as a, leading design on the physical tools
Yeah.
and the digital tools that are used by seafarers, I think that there's so much to be said for safety gains that can be made there by
Mm.
understanding, what the person using the system is actually trying to accomplish and making it easy for them to do so,
Yeah.
which I think is something that our industry has really struggled with for a really long time, because we make these tools to the technical
Yeah.
specifications because that's what the shipyard
Yeah.
wants. They want to
Yeah.
meet tech specs.
Yeah.
So, we make it easy for them to check the tech specs, but then we forget that someone's going to use this system for 30
Yeah.
years. And that
Yeah.
person really hates the way the
Yeah.
menus
Yeah.
are. And, we make it easy for people to make human errors because we don't make the systems as understandable as they could be.
Yeah.
And I think that that has to do a lot with commercial forces, because the commercial forces that we feel as a tech manufacturer, like in my regular job, and the user forces that are in consumer
Yeah.
products are completely
Yeah.
different. So you end up with really great consumer products or really great things made for yachts and fishing,
Yes.
where the vessel owner is the purchaser of the
Yeah.
system. And yeah, it's more expensive to develop that way, but you make something they really
Yeah.
want. Versus the industrial
Yeah.
side, where the tools really could be so much better, but because the center isn't on the humans using the
Yeah.
tools,
True.
it's on, the technical engineering. Does it functionally
Yeah.
work? Does it meet the specifications? Instead of how can we make their job easier and make that human machine interface work
Yeah.
well? And for bridge and automation systems and for all of those kind of technology tools, there's a huge gap between what was mandated by IMO as far as and mandated by ICS and by everyone,
Mm.
and
True.
all of the regulations, and what needs to actually be functionally
Yeah.
happening with those systems to make a good partnership between the human using it,
Yeah.
their mental model of the processes that are happening around them,
Yeah.
and the tool that they're using to build that model.
True.
Um,
And
yeah,
you're
'cause
onto it really. I think this is where we have a huge potential in our industry. We are very early days in our digital journey. We're starting to now kind of get access to data, but the quality is not really good enough, and we don't really have the tool to analyze it. And the tools we have is not really very user friendly. And I think we are actually lacking the analytical skills
Mhm,
to bridge that. So we have a lot of
mhm,
very practical people in our industry, but we may not have enough of kind of that analytical skills to really develop these tools to be used in a practical way. And I think that is a fantastic potential we have. So I choose to actually take a positive attitude towards it. But I think
mhm,
the bottleneck, coming to our bottleneck or taking the advantage of this, is also very much our conservatism, which has
mhm.
good reasons. Because I mean, when you change things, you do run the risk, and especially on border ships where you need a hierarchy. If
It
something
can be
goes
worse.
wrong, you need to know exactly who's responsible for what, and we don't have
Yeah,
time to all this fuss. It's
mhm,
a reason for our conservatism here.
yeah,
But I do think that as we develop digital tools uh, and decision support, we need to think differently on how we actually run our ships in order
completely,
in
and
order to take advantage of it. If you don't do that, if you're trying to kind of bring all these new tools to use while we are keeping our organization, our responsibilities as they've always been, we are not going
yeah,
to get the value of it. Then it's going to be just a huge investment and fancy thing we show in some press conference or in what kind of conference we go to, but really it's not going to give us that much.
yeah. There's a ISO standard that I work with quite often that's on the human-centered design of control rooms, but we take that also to the bridge and to the engine room and everywhere. And the first part of that I think no one actually does in the industry is evaluating the tasks that need to be done by the users in the
Mm.
space. What kind of tasks, how critical, how often, how frequent? Is it a task that they're doing every 10
Yeah.
minutes, like calculating take rates that could actually be done by the
Yeah.
system completely, but isn't because they haven't asked?
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
how to split those roles up, and I think that the industry is really losing out by not participating in a good human-centered design process for all of the tools that they're
For
using,
sure.
because the industry can influence the tools that they have just as much as the tools can influence how good or bad their work day feels.
Absolutely. Oh, no, I totally follow you there.
Yeah, but I think, is there anything else you want to share before we
I
go?
think I've covered the ground. I think we are a bit over time as well, aren't we?
With Matt, I went almost a half hour over.
Okay.
It was almost an hour because it was so interesting. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights, and hopefully I'll get to meet you again at some point.
Hopefully, and
And
thanks for inviting me. It's been great to talk to you, and look forward to following your project.
thanks. We'll see how successful I am in
You
doing
know,
this in the end.
I think just by doing this, you are achieving something. So and sometimes the journey is actually more important than an outcome. And
In the end, I don't necessarily care if other people are really watching these and following it, as long as I'm getting the information compiled in a way that people can reference and use it later on, and hopefully we can all learn something. I'm learning something new every day
exactly,
doing
so
this.
do I. And then the day we stop learning, then that's the day we just take down the curtain and go to bed.
Exactly. But thank you so much.
Thank
I'm
you for
gonna
having me.
end the stream.
Very good.